Good afternoon. In today's class, we will be discussing Matthew Arnold's poem To Marguerite Continued. To Marguerite Continued was first published in a collection of poems of Matthew Arnold titled Empedocles on Etna in 1852. One of the most intriguing aspects of this poem is the identity of the lady in question, Marguerite. Though the identity has not been clearly established, Park Conan, a biographer of Arnold, brings forth the idea that a girl called Mary Claudie, with whom Arnold probably fell in love while he was in his mid-20s, might have inspired these poems, as well as the collection of poems which are known as his Switzerland poems. Be that as it may, the present poem opens with a stark yes, which possibly affirms something which has immediately been spoken earlier. The poem then goes on to state that each of us live alone like islands dotting a sea. The stanza closes with the observation that each such island is made aware of the boundaries of his or her being by the currents of water that flow around it, grasping it as it were. The second stanza of the poem share a sort of argumentative connection with the third stanza. The second stanza opens with "but when," and the third continues the idea left unfinished with "oh then." What these two stanzas try to say together is that when moonlight baths the valleys of these islands, when the balmy and soothing breezes of spring blow upon them and the nightingales on clear nights, when the sky is full of stars, sing with heavenly beauty in the island's valleys, and the sounds of the nightingale songs can be heard across the sea and the straits, then a longing that feels like a despair is felt to the core of their beings by these islands, and they begin to feel that they were once united with one another as parts of the same landmass. The islands at this point wish to be reunited to one another. The last stanza of the poem opens with a question: who was it that decreed or ordered that this longing for reuniting with one another would be suppressed as soon as it was felt? And who was it who thus made their desire to unite useless? The poem closes with an answer to this powerful question. It was a God who had planned the separation of the islands from each other, and it was He who has ordered the vast, alienating sea to lie in between. Effectively, this poem is a metaphorical description of the human condition as Arnold viewed it. And the condition was that each individual was trapped within their own life and their own selfish being, thus making life itself a separating and an alienating factor. The resultant feelings of loneliness has been described brilliantly by the line, "We mortal millions live alone." The first stanza closes with two other expressions equally powerful: enclasping flow and endless bounds. The former expression refers to the inescapability of the people trapped within the islands of their own selfish minds, obsessed, as it were, with materialistic concerns. They have been caught in the overwhelming grasp of the quality of life that they had chosen, and a life that is gross, materialistic, self-obsessed, selfish, that had done away with religion and with the commonality of faith, and had thus plunged them into doubt and despair. The next expression though apparently seeming a bit paradoxical, however, invites us to look closely and deeply into the implication. The boundary of selfishness and mistrust that each individual had restricted the spontaneous feelings of the heart with no offered respite was essentially and limitlessly oppressive. The description of vernal nature in its nightly beauty hints at the awakening of the desire of love in the poet's mind. This feeling, however, comes coupled with hopeless longing as each annihilated individual or separated individual feels the inability to shake off their solitude and reunite with one another in love, thus reforming the community they instinctively feel had once existed in the past and of which they are constantly reminded by the partial connection that is created when music from one island echoes in another as well. The line, "Now round us spreads the watery plain," evokes a feeling of deep pathos and makes the fervent wish of the next line sound as being utterly devoid of hope. The concluding stanza of the poem attacks that aspect of the changing Victorian society that troubled Arnold the most, namely loss of faith. He refuses to accept the idea that God would have brought about the alienating attitude of selfishness and doubt, and suggests powerfully, with his use of the expression "a God," that it was no more the true faith that people followed. In many ways, this poem is a sequel to the preceding poem in the series titled Isolation. The poem Isolation, which is in some way a bitter expression of disappointment and resentment because the poet, not having found his feelings for his beloved reciprocated, visualizes her in utter solitude and isolation. The present poem builds upon that idea and looks at the thought from the opposing viewpoint. Because everybody was mentally isolated from one another, no love or no genuine love could essentially exist. Now, with regard to the stylistic aspects of the poem is composed in iambic tetrameter with the rhyme scheme of ABABCC that results in each stanza concluding with a couplet which seems to emphasize what has been discussed in that stanza. The rhythm of the poem appears a bit stately, serious, however, and perhaps at odds with the poignant lyricism. It is nevertheless exercising a sort of control on the emotion that prevents the poem from sounding overtly sentimental. Thank you.